Dr. Lieberman, the latest Epstein document dump has cast former Duchess of York Sarah Ferguson and her ex-husband, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as grubby and selfish.
A former royal employee says the habits of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and Sarah Ferguson left staff livid. The former prince and his ex-wife have been embroiled in the Jeffrey Epstein saga in recent weeks, after showing up several times in email exchanges with the offender in the latest release of the files. The most striking detail in all of this is not the scandals or the headlines, but the fact that staff were so upset by Andrew and Sarah's behaviour that it eventually reached the Queen herself. Not a private word, not a quiet adjustment. A direct intervention because the household simply could not cope with how things were being run. That alone tells you how unusual the situation had become. More is unravelling every day as staff speak out.
Who knew of Epstein's vile activities, yet continued to grow their relationship with him. So much of the communication that we've read is after he was convicted on some really serious and ugly charges.
Today, we'll uncover what they're revealing. Over the years, a steady stream of former staff, courtiers and royal watchers have described Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and Sarah Ferguson as extraordinarily demanding behind closed doors. Not in the dramatic shouting sense every time, but in a constant, grinding way that left people exhausted, frustrated, and in some cases, actively trying to avoid working for them. One of the most detailed accounts comes from former royal butler Paul Burrell, who has now spoken openly about the early years of Andrew and Sarah's marriage. According to Burrell, staff were already unhappy very early on, long before the marriage began to unravel publicly. He describes a household that simply did not follow the normal rhythms of royal life. Royal kitchens are built on routine. Meals are planned, food waste is avoided. Staff know exactly when they are needed and when they are not. Andrew and Sarah, according to Burrell, ignored all of that. They reportedly stayed in bed for days at a time, refusing to get up, while still expecting food to be prepared on demand. Breakfast would turn into lunch, lunch into tea, tea into dinner, and then into late-night snacks, all at unpredictable hours. Burrell writes that maids were not even allowed into the bedroom to make the bed for days. This was not laziness in the ordinary sense. It created a knock-on effect across the household. Staff could not clean properly, schedules collapsed, kitchens were being run like an a la carte restaurant rather than a royal household.
Epstein was a very mysterious man who obviously did a lot of bad things. But he had this magic, this ability to attract people who were very rich, people who were in high places, royalty, and how he kept them friends to be friends of his is by sort of keeping them in, having something on them.
He says the royal chiefs were furious. They were used to serving the Queen and the wider family at fixed times, with menus planned in advance. Suddenly, they were scrambling to produce elaborate meals whenever Andrew and Sarah felt like entertaining friends or staying in bed. The waste alone reportedly horrified senior staff, especially given the Queen's own well-known dislike of excess. Eventually, staff complaints reached the master of the household, who in turn informed the Queen. According to Burrell, she stepped in and put a stop to what he described as lavish gluttony. The message was simple. If the Queen could decide her meals in advance and stick to routine, then her son and his wife could do the same. What is interesting is that this pattern did not disappear as time went on. Royal biographer Andrew Lownie has written extensively about Andrew's relationships with staff across different residences and different phases of his life. In his research, Lownie repeatedly returns to the same theme. Andrew expected absolute loyalty, instant compliance, and personal devotion, but did not always offer respect or stability in return.
Royal staff are refusing to work for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor following his move to Sandringham. There are new allegations about the sordid and degrading acts the King's brother and his billionaire criminal friend wanted to carry out.
Former staff have described Andrew as moody and volatile. Not constantly aggressive, but prone to sudden irritation when things did not go his way. According to Lownie, Andrew had a habit of issuing instructions and then becoming angry when they were not carried out exactly as he imagined, even when those instructions were vague or impractical. There are also accounts of staff being frozen out after falling out of favour. Once someone was seen as disloyal or insufficiently attentive, their position became uncomfortable very quickly. Some were reassigned, others quietly left. Over time, Andrew's pool of trusted aides grew smaller and smaller. Sarah Ferguson's reputation with staff followed a slightly different pattern. She was often described as friendly and chatty at first, sometimes overly familiar. But that warmth could reportedly disappear just as quickly. Staff have said she could be chaotic, changing plans constantly, making demands at the last minute, and assuming others would simply adjust. Entertaining was a major issue. Sarah was known for hosting social gatherings that extended late into the night, often with little notice. That meant staff staying on well past scheduled hours, resetting rooms multiple times, and preparing food and drinks long after they were meant to have finished for the day. Over time, this created resentment. Not because staff disliked entertaining, but because there was no structure. Everything revolved around Andrew and Sarah's moods and impulses. After their separation and divorce, some might have expected this to improve. In reality, many former aides say the situation became more difficult. Andrew's sense of grievance appeared to deepen. According to Lownie and others, he struggled with being told no, especially as his public role diminished.
Former Duke's denials failing to stop his expedited eviction from Royal Lodge. Staff at his temporary Sandringham home told they can refuse to work for Andrew if they feel uncomfortable.
As privileges were reduced, expectations inside the household did not seem to change. There were accounts of Andrew reacting badly to budget constraints, security changes, and staffing reductions. Rather than adapting, he reportedly blamed those around him. Several staff members have said morale was low, with people constantly worried about provoking irritation or being blamed for decisions that were beyond their control. This pattern continued into more recent years, particularly after Andrew stepped back from public duties. Reports suggest that finding and keeping staff willing to work for him became increasingly difficult. The role was demanding, emotionally draining, and offered little long-term security. Former aides have described Andrew as isolated, spending long periods alone, fixated on perceived slights and past status. That isolation, according to some accounts, only worsened his interactions with those who remained around him. Sarah Ferguson, meanwhile, continued to float in and out of Andrew's orbit. While they maintained a public image of amicable coexistence, staff reportedly found the dynamic confusing. One day they were united, the next day distant, with staff left to manage the emotional fallout. What stands out across all these stories is consistency. Different people, different years, different residences, but the same themes keep emerging. Unpredictability, entitlement, a lack of consideration for the people expected to keep everything running smoothly. None of this suggests criminal behaviour or wrongdoing in a legal sense. What it does show, according to those who lived it, is a working environment that many found unbearable. It is also worth noting that many of these accounts were not given lightly. Former royal staff are famously discreet. When they speak, it is usually because the experience stayed with them long after they left. The Queen's intervention early on is particularly telling. She rarely involved herself directly in household disputes unless absolutely necessary. For matters to escalate to that point suggests the situation had become untenable. Just a few days ago, Andrew was quietly moved out of Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, the home he had occupied for more than 2 decades. According to several reports, including eyewitness accounts and royal commentators, The departure happened late at night under a cloak of discretion.
I think he was on the spectrum, the autism spectrum. He had this strange preoccupation with stuffed animals on his bed, and they had to be in these specific kinds of, and other kinds of dolls, and they had to be in specific kinds of places.
Marking a dramatic end to his residency at the historic 30-room mansion, as pressure mounted following the release of new Epstein-related documents. Andrew is now living on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, initially taking up residence in Wood Farm Cottage, a much smaller and more private property on land owned by King Charles III. The plan is for Andrew to eventually move from Wood Farm into Marsh Farm, another dwelling on the Sandringham estate, which is described in the press as a modest 5-bedroom farmhouse, quite unlike the grandeur of Royal Lodge. Renovations and preparatory work are still underway at Marsh Farm, and Andrew's permanent move there has been delayed while that work continues. Sources note that the cottage at Wood Farm, once home to Prince Philip, offers a quieter life outside the public eye, but Marsh Farm will likely be his long-term address once it is ready. Even within his new surroundings, the fallout from his past continues to affect his daily life. Multiple reports in the last few days say that some estate staff have declined to work for Andrew, citing discomfort with his status as a pariah following the Epstein revelations, and that senior royals have been keen to emphasise that Andrew is now a private citizen with no formal royal protection. Buckingham Palace has stated it will cooperate with any police inquiries into new allegations, a move commentators see as an attempt to further distance the institution from his ongoing controversy. So today, as Andrew's world has shrunk, his old patterns of behaviour appear to have followed him. Fewer staff, fewer allies, and fewer people willing to tolerate behaviour that once might have been quietly absorbed for the sake of royal duty. The exact details of every interaction with staff will never be fully known. Royal households are built on silence. But when so many voices, over so many years, tell similar stories, it becomes hard to dismiss them as coincidence. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Do you think Andrew and Sarah ever truly understood how deeply their behaviour affected the people around them? Or were staff simply seen as part of the furniture, there to absorb whatever came their way? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to keep up with the latest royal stories, make sure you subscribe.